There's nobody here.
Woo! Y'all gonna make me lose my mind. Up in here, up in here.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, and that was the wedding reception transition from old folks music to DMX, which I heard about on Mary Katharine Ham's Getting Hammered with Vic Mattis today. How'd you like I condensed the entire wedding reception playlist into 2 cuts?
I mean, I think you chose well. Those were representative of the wedding bifurcation of the playlist. Yes.
I want people to listen to Mary Katharine Ham and Vic Mattis today on Getting Hammered, if only to hear the absolute stone cold truth about wedding receptions, which is they're too loud and too strange for people over who get Medicare, and they are absolutely wonderful at the beginning. But when my daughter got married, Mary Katharine, we made it very easy for anyone in that age bracket, of which I am now a member, to leave the room and still have fun because it got too loud. Did you do that with Steve? Did you create a place for the oldsters to go?
I don't think there was really a place, but we were on a beach, so you could just wander off and have peace relatively close by if you wanted to. But and I do think there was a fairly good mix of like Motown and older music to include those folks. And then we did shift later in the night to more modern stuff.
Well, you know, I still wonder if your mom and dad listen to Getting Hammered, because you did the old lady talk stuff again today, and they're going to object to you pretty soon, bringing up calling yourself old, because that puts us in the museum.
It does, but you know what? They're such good humored people, particularly my mom, and she's probably just like, I'm thankful to have a daughter who's an old lady. You know, I'm glad I've been here this many years. We both are.
Okay. Okay, that's a fair enough way to go. Let me now bust you on, you did the big reveal. You did the hack on the cafe car. And I didn't want people to know that. That is a very closely guarded secret, and you went and told the world about the cafe car on the non-Acela train.
Yeah, it's nice. Sorry, everyone.
Well,
if it's all bulked up now.
Yeah, you've ruined it. Let me move on. Diureses, which, because I'd never heard of diureses before. Did you?
I had never heard that, and I feel like I'm pretty well versed in editing marks and punctuation, but our friend Vic Mattis is the expert on the editing terms, and he taught me something new.
And he set you up pretty well by asking you what he had for dinner last night. Now, let's get to the serious part. We agree.
Yeah.
I do not like the idea of the president, in an otherwise fine trip, lifting the sanctions on the al-Qaeda turned nice guy killer of Damascus. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is the thing about Trump, is that he likes to be liked. He goes on these trips. I'm very open to him having different ways of doing things in the Middle East, because I think it served all of us very well during his first term. You got the Abraham Accords, you got the embassy move to Jerusalem, which, remember, that was like, if that ever happened, it would be the end of the world. It would be World War III for sure. And you know what? He did the right thing, and it turned out completely different, because the conventional wisdom on many things in the Middle East can be wrong. That being said, I do feel like in this term, it feels a little bit too much sometimes like people are wanting to make a deal for the sake of making deals. And I know that we get a little rush out of doing that, and often the deals can be good, but they're not always good. And in this case, I look askance for sure.
They bought a lot of Boeing planes today. Sure, I do not own Boeing. To my knowledge, it might be in some mutual fund. I don't own Boeing, so Boeing is very happy today. I listened this morning to Dan Senor's podcast and then the commentary podcast when I was out after listening to Getting Hammered. They're very upset with the president's speech yesterday because he took a shot at W, took a shot at the neocons. I don't mind that too much. It's basically Reagan Bush 1 foreign policy, Powell doctrine. Do you think I'm being rose-colored glasses there?
I think I'm medium on it. I wasn't upset about it, but again, my understanding of Trump is often that, like, he's going to say stuff I don't like. And so I go in with that baseline, but I didn't have big objections to the speech.
Okay, neither did I. I do also want to point out that after Idan Alexander was released, the Israelis went and blew up Mohammed Sinwar with 9 bombs, including probably some innocent people in that hospital. And we didn't say boo. Biden would have had a
Yeah.
meltdown, or whoever was pretending to be Biden that day would have had a meltdown. They hadn't even bothered. There's not even a giddy up in this trip.
No, I agree. That would not have been the case under a Biden administration, nor would Biden have, known Edan Alexander's name, or that an American was still in Gaza who should be released. So there's a lot of things going pretty well here. I was so happy to see him posting pictures, drinking beers in public places, and just enjoying being a free person once again. And I still think it's a sin to this day that most Americans don't know the names of Americans who were held in Gaza over those many, more than a year now. And under a different administration, that would have been different. They just didn't, the press didn't cover it because it was a bad story for Biden, and I hate it.
Yeah. Let me now bring to your attention the fact that I've got a theory to sell you on Trump and tariffs. Here's my story. I'm sticking to it. He did all this wacky stuff for 3 months because he was socializing the permanent 10% tariff, which I view as a tax on the world for our maintaining freedom of the seas. And that people can, we talked about dolls and pencils last week. Yeah, you can substitute goods if you've been tariff impacted. That we don't live in a country where there's only one shelf of one thing. So if you don't like the 10% pop, but I like the 10% pop because the other countries aren't carrying their weight, Mary Catherine. Do you think they are?
No, I don't always. And this is where I'm open to some Trump machinations. I think during the discussion of NATO and people ponying up, he got some of those countries to pony up a little bit more. I don't love this way of doing that. I think Americans and some small businesses are going to suffer. But he has a way of, yes, you're right, of playing an expectations game where he says, I'm going to do a trade war with the whole world. And then when you get relief from that with 1 deal, 2 deals, a little back off with China, because it turns out that we like to trade with each other, everybody goes, oh, okay, this is much better. This is much better. This is okay. And actually, this is why he doesn't respond to political gravity in the same way that others do, because he sets expectations wildly.
And 10%. 10% is now great. Don't go anywhere, Mary Catherine. I'm going to talk to you during the break and play it a little bit later. So I saved for off air with Mary Catherine the discussion of how Joe Biden handed the presidency to Donald Trump, the New Yorker excerpt of Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's brand new book called Original Sin. I am of a mixed view of this whole thing because I think we've got audio of me in 2022 saying, that man's infirm. I think you were doing the same. This should not be a story, right? We all knew.
Right.
We all knew.
Yep.
So, were you ever shuttered?
What's that?
Were you ever shut down on air for bringing up the infirmity of Joe Biden?
No, but honestly, I was probably too polite about it. The Brit Humes of the world were better about it, but I would say it, and then by the time that it was more obvious and more dire. Either my former outlet would not cover it, CNN would not cover it, or I wasn't on air at that point. But look, this is like we're reaching ludicrous levels when the NBC Nightly News is doing a segment about other journalists having noticed the thing that 80% of Americans noticed 3 or 4 years ago. I just think it's sort of insane what we're doing here, because nobody needed a degree to understand what was happening to the president. The write-up, this New Yorker piece, has a bit in it where his aide brings him to Clooney. We always saw aides walking him around, sometimes like handling him by the arm, brings him up to Clooney, and it's so very nursing home where he says, George, you remember George, and then he doesn't remember George, and then he has to clarify, George Clooney from the, it's very, you're dealing with somebody who's diminished, you're walking them around, you're giving them cues, and these people are all gathered to give this guy tens of millions of dollars to be president again for 4 more years. The whole thing was ridiculous from top to bottom, and I know that these journalists knew it. I know they had more access than someone like myself, but you didn't need access. You could watch him not know how to get from Marine One to his house.
And we still do not have an answer to what are we going to do in the future. I'm not so concerned about the past. We're coming back on the network. Mary Catherine, stand by. Welcome back, America. Mary Katharine Ham is host of Getting Hammered, and she is here with me for one more segment because on today's Getting Hammered edition, available at iTunes, Spotify with Vic Mattis, You actually made me think of something that I had never considered, that the Biden family might need the money. And they're trying to rehab Joe to bring down a couple seven-figure speeches, which I don't think are coming his way, but it had never occurred. They might need the money. I just had never thought of that before. Have you been talking about that with people?
I haven't been talking about that with people except for the other day on Meghan McCain's podcast, and she had been talking to Mark Halperin about this, who has pretty good sources. But look, they don't strike me as a wise investment kind of family that sucks away a bunch of money for a rainy day, right? And they've been living high on the hog for many, many years, a thing that we can all now admit that, like, Hunter Biden wasn't an international energy expert and a renowned painter. In fact, they were paying for access to Biden. Well, he doesn't have access to give anymore. He has to give speeches. They have to rehab him just enough to keep all of these grandkids, all of these kids living in the way to which they've become accustomed. Because I have severe doubts that any of them planned for the future. They thought they were going to have an ex-president grandpa and dad who was going to be all over the world giving speeches. They didn't know he was going to be persona non grata when all of this was over. And I think you're right. Those speeches aren't coming.
No speech. Maybe Dr. Jill will get some speeches, maybe not. Last question, Mary Catherine. Has anyone on his team yet been asked in public, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, KJP, now we all know that the president was impaired for at least 6 months, therefore the 25th Amendment should have been invoked. How did you not invoke it? Isn't that like the question we need to ask?
Well, this is the thing to me. I don't care when George Clooney found it disturbing. I would like to know who was running the country when Biden was not. This is the great scandal, is that an unelected cabal of people was probably doing most of the work inside that White House. He could only physically work, we know we have this on record, for several hours a day. There were things going on at other times. There were other people making decisions. We all know it. This is like very clear. And I would like to know how that went down. And I would like those people to answer for it. And by the way, the press saying they lied to us, tell us who lied to you. And then get them out here and ask them questions. Grill them like you would a Republican.
Amen. I would just like to know who was president. Or maybe they divided up the responsibility. Maybe Jake Sullivan was president on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and Tony Blinken was president on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the chief of staff was president on the weekend. I don't know, but the 25th Amendment did not work. And that tells us all we can't. Donald Trump is the exception to the rule. The rule ought to be, if you're 70, out. If you can be on the Supreme Court, you can be a senator until you fall over, but you can't be president. You agree with that rule?
I mean, it's getting pretty dicey out there. You're right. 25th Amendment didn't work. They tried to make it work against Trump in his first term, but they couldn't do anything with Biden. And now they're going to try it with Fetterman. Try to blow him up.
I wish we had more time. We don't. Hey, friends, go get Getting Hammered today. It's hilarious, especially on wedding receptions. Brutally honest. Leave some tunes in there for the old people, and then give them a room to go to when it gets loud.